911, what's your emergency? Oh my God. The bear. The bear is attacking him. He's streaming and the bear just, please send help. It's Dylan Brown's place on Cedar Ridge Road. Ma'am, did you say a bear is attacking someone? Yes. His pet bear. It's killing him. I can see it on the stream. Oh God, there's so much blood. We're dispatching units immediately. Is the victim still? I don't know. The stream just cut out. Please hurry. In the remote wilderness of northern Montana, where the pine forests meet the Rocky Mountain foothills, what began as a routine morning livestream would become the most horrifying wildlife attack ever broadcast to thousands of viewers in real time. The autumn air was crisp that October morning, with frost still clinging to the grass and a light mist hovering between the trees. It was the kind of peaceful mountain morning that Dylan Brown had showcased hundreds of times before to his devoted followers. Dylan Brown was 32 years old, a wildlife enthusiast turned social media sensation who had built his entire online empire around one extraordinary relationship, his bond with a 700-pound grizzly bear named Brutus. For 5 years, Dylan had documented their seemingly impossible friendship, amassing over 3 million followers across various platforms who tuned in daily to watch him hand-feed, play with, and even wrestle the massive predator. He had no idea that on this particular morning, as he adjusted his camera for what would be his final stream, that the trust he'd spent years building was about to shatter in the most violent way imaginable. This is Dylan Brown's story. A story of misplaced trust, the illusion of control, and the moment when nature's most powerful predator reminded the world why some boundaries should never be crossed. What started as a heartwarming tale of interspecies friendship would end with screens going dark, viewers calling 911, and a community forever traumatized by what they witnessed. You're watching Animal Attack Files, where we bring you the most shocking real-life animal encounters. If this story grips you, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because what you're about to witness will change how you see exotic pet ownership forever. This isn't just another wildlife tragedy, it's a cautionary tale that played out live before thousands of horrified viewers who could do nothing but watch as their favorite content creator met his fate at the paws of the animal he called his best friend. The morning of October 15, 2024, started like any other for Dylan's fans. The notification popped up at 7:30 a.m. Mountain Time. Dylan Brown is going live, morning coffee with Brutus. Within minutes, over 8,000 viewers had joined the stream, eager to start their day with the wholesome content they'd come to expect. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would haunt them forever, something that would transform from a cheerful morning routine into evidence in a death investigation. What makes this tragedy even more chilling is that every second was captured, every warning sign ignored, every moment of false security, and, ultimately, every terrifying second of the attack itself. The digital footprint Dylan left behind would become a haunting record of how wrong things can go when humans forget that no matter how many salmon treats you feed them, no matter how many belly rubs you give, a grizzly bear remains one of North America's most formidable apex predators. Dylan Brown wasn't just another wildlife enthusiast with a camera and a death wish. He was Montana's golden boy, the local kid who'd turned his childhood obsession with bears into a multi-million-dollar empire. Born in 1992 in Kalispell, Montana, Dylan grew up in the shadow of Glacier National Park, where his father worked as a park ranger and his mother taught biology at the local high school. His passion for bears began at age 7 when his father took him to observe grizzlies fishing for salmon at Brooks Falls. While other children collected baseball cards, Dylan collected every book, documentary, and research paper about bears he could find. Friends described Dylan as charismatic, fearless, and dangerously optimistic. Sarah Chin, who knew Dylan for 15 years since their freshman year at University of Montana, recalls a specific incident that captured his essence perfectly. We were hiking in Glacier when we encountered a black bear on the trail. Everyone else backed away slowly, but Dylan? He sat down cross-legged and started talking to it like it was a dog. It said he could feel its energy, that it didn't mean us harm. The bear eventually wandered off, and Dylan acted like he'd just made a new friend. That was Dylan. He believed he had this supernatural connection with wildlife that made him immune to danger. But it was Dylan's unshakable belief in his own ability to communicate with predators that would ultimately seal his fate. He believed that fear was the enemy, that animals could sense your intentions, and that love could overcome millions of years of predatory instinct. Instagram bio read, "Building bridges between species, one trust fall at a time." His YouTube channel description boldly claimed, proving that humans and apex predators can coexist in harmony. These weren't just marketing slogans for Dylan, they were gospel truths he'd staked his life on. His family background played a crucial role in shaping this dangerous worldview. Dylan's father, Robert Brown, had spent 30 years working closely with bears in Glacier National Park without a single aggressive encounter. His mother, Dr. Patricia Brown, had published several papers on bear behavior and conservation. But while his parents respected bears from a professional distance, Dylan interpreted their careers as proof that bears could be partners rather than just subjects of study. "My parents showed me bears weren't monsters," Dylan said in a 2022 podcast interview. "I'm just taking it to the next level, showing they can be family." Dylan's rise to internet fame began in 2019 when a video of him hand-feeding a wild black bear went viral on TikTok. The clip, which showed him calmly offering berries to a 300-pound bear while narrating its body language, garnered 50 million views in a week. Suddenly, the local wildlife photographer with 10,000 Instagram followers became an overnight sensation. Sponsorship deals poured in. National Geographic featured him in a documentary. Netflix approached him about a reality series. By 2021, Dylan had quit his job as a wilderness guide to focus full-time on content creation. But success brought new pressures. The algorithm demanded increasingly spectacular content. Comments sections filled with viewers wanting bigger thrills, closer encounters, more dangerous situations. Dylan's childhood friend, Marcus Torres, who worked as his camera operator for 2 years, noticed the change. Early on, Dylan was about education. He keeps serious. Distance, use zoom lenses, talk about bear safety. But once the money started flowing, once he hit 1 million subscribers, it became about pushing boundaries. Every video had to top the last one. It started saying things like, "They expect more from me," and "I can't let my audience down." It was this pressure that led to Dylan's most fateful decision, adopting Brutus. In spring 2020, Montana Wildlife Control contacted Dylan about an orphaned grizzly cub whose mother had been killed by a vehicle strike. The 3-month-old cub needed specialized care, and authorities knew Dylan had both the facilities and expertise. What they didn't anticipate was that Dylan would see this as an opportunity to create the ultimate content, raising a grizzly bear from infancy and documenting their bond as Brutus grew from a 30-pound bundle of fur into a 700-pound apex predator. Dylan's girlfriend of 3 years, Ashley Mendoza, watched this transformation with growing alarm. The Dylan I fell in love with respected wildlife. He understood boundaries. But once Brutus arrived, it was like he lost all perspective. He'd bottle feed this cub on Instagram Live, let it sleep in our bed, talk about how Brutus saw him as his mother. I tried telling him that Brutus was growing fast, that those play bites were getting harder, those paw swipes stronger. He'd just laugh and say, "Brutus would never hurt me. He loves me." The community of Whitefish, Montana, where Dylan had built his compound, was divided. Some saw him as a conservation hero, educating millions about grizzly bears and donating substantial sums to wildlife preservation. Others viewed him as a ticking time bomb, setting a dangerous example that would inevitably end in tragedy. Local wildlife expert Dr. James Mitchell, who had worked with bears for 40 years, was particularly vocal in his concerns. Dylan had knowledge, but he confused that with wisdom. He knew bear behavior, but he forgot the most Important rule: a grizzly bear is never tame, it's only temporarily tolerant. Yet those who knew Dylan best would later say that warning him was futile. His brother, Michael Brown, put it succinctly: Dylan didn't think he was invincible. It was worse than that. He thought his bond with Brutus transcended nature itself. He genuinely believed their love was stronger than instinct. How do you argue with someone who thinks they've achieved the impossible? Grizzly bears are North America's most formidable land predators, with males weighing up to 800 pounds and possessing a bite force of 1,200 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a bowling ball. In the wild, these massive carnivores roam territories spanning hundreds of square miles, following ancient patterns encoded in their DNA over millennia. They can run up to 35 miles per hour, climb trees, and possess a sense of smell 7 times stronger than a bloodhound. Wildlife biologists estimate that grizzlies are responsible for an average of 1 fatal attack per year in North America, with most incidents occurring when humans surprise a bear or come between a mother and her cubs. The grizzly that would change Dylan Brown's life forever was anything but ordinary. Brutus was born in March 2020 in the Flathead National Forest, the product of a massive male known to locals as Scarface, and a young female who'd only recently reached breeding age. 3 months old when his mother was killed by a logging truck on Highway 2, Brutus weighed just 30 pounds and still had the bright blue eyes that all bear cubs are born with. The Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks faced a difficult decision: euthanize the orphan or find a licensed wildlife educator willing to provide lifetime care. Dylan first encountered Brutus on May 15, 2020, at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Kalispell. He later described the meeting in a YouTube video that would garner 10 million views. When I walked into that enclosure, this little ball of fur looked at me, really looked at me, and I swear he chose me. He walked right past the other rehabilitators and climbed into my lap. It was like he was saying, "You're my person now." What Dylan interpreted as a mystical connection, animal behaviorists would later identify as classic imprinting behavior. The cub was simply seeking the warmth and security of the largest nearby mammal. For the first 2 years, Dylan and Brutus seemed to validate the impossible. Dylan bottle-fed the cub 6 times a day, taught him to respond to over 30 verbal commands, and documented every milestone for his rapidly growing audience. Brutus learned to high-five, dance, and even hug on command, behaviors that delighted viewers but deeply concerned wildlife experts. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, a bear behavior specialist at the University of Montana, warned Dylan repeatedly that he was creating a dangerous situation. Every trick you teach him, every boundary you cross, you're creating a bear that doesn't understand he's a bear, she told him during a contentious meeting in 2021. You're not raising, you're creating a confused predator who won't understand why he can't act on his instincts. Dylan dismissed these concerns with a confidence that bordered on messianic. He believed he'd discovered something previous bear experts had missed, that grizzlies were capable of forming emotional bonds that could override their predatory nature. He pointed to Brutus's gentle behavior during their daily streams, the way the bear would carefully take marshmallows from Dylan's mouth, how he'd rest his massive head on Dylan's shoulder during story time, how he'd never once shown aggression despite weighing 400 pounds by his 2nd birthday. The experts said he'd turn on me when he hit sexual maturity, Dylan told his audience in March 2023. Well, he's 3 years old now, fully mature, and look at us. Still best friends. Sometimes the experts are wrong. But experts weren't wrong about the warning signs. Dylan was simply blind to them. Video analysis conducted after the attack revealed dozens of instances of what behaviorists call agonistic behavior, subtle signs of stress and aggression that Dylan either missed or deliberately ignored. In a stream from June 2024, Brutus can be seen flattening his ears while Dylan hugs him. In another, the bear's jaw pops, a clear stress signal, as Dylan rides on his back. Most alarming was footage from August where Brutus mock charges Dylan during feeding time, stopping just short of contact. Dylan laughed it off, telling viewers, "He's just playing. Big goofball thinks he's still a cub." The compound where Dylan housed Brutus was a testament to both his dedication and his delusion. Spanning 5 acres of electrified fencing, it featured a natural pond, artificial den, climbing structures, and a climate-controlled shelter that cost over $200,000 to construct. But the most controversial feature was the interaction zone, a reinforced area where Dylan would enter Brutus's space for their daily bonding sessions. The setup violated virtually every protocol for captive bear management. Standard facilities maintained double fencing, lockout areas, and strict no-contact policies. Dylan called these measures prison rules and insisted they were based on fear, not understanding. Local authorities conducted monthly inspections but found themselves in a legal gray area. Dylan's permits were technically in order, his facility met minimum standards, and his millions of followers created political pressure to allow him to continue. Sheriff Tom Bradley later admitted, "We all knew it was just a matter of time, but what could we do? He wasn't breaking any laws, just using damn poor judgment. You can't arrest someone for being an idiot." The transformation in Brutus became more pronounced in the months leading up to the attack. Trail cameras around the compound showed him pacing the perimeter at night, a behavior typically associated with frustration or territorial stress. His food consumption increased dramatically from 30 pounds per day to nearly 50. Most tellingly, he began scent marking obsessively, rubbing against trees and structures in ways that suggested heightened territorial aggression. Dr. Mitchell, reviewing the footage, noted, "This bear was screaming that something was wrong." Every behavior indicated a predator under extreme stress, asserting dominance, preparing for conflict. Still, Dylan refused to see the danger. In what would become a tragically ironic social media post from September 2024, he shared a photo of fresh claw marks on a tree inside Brutus's enclosure with the caption, "Look at my boy showing off his strength. Some people see aggression, I see artistic expression. Brutus isn't dangerous, he's misunderstood. The only thing dangerous here is how much I love this magnificent creature. #BearDad, #BrutusBear, #LoveConquersNature." 3 weeks later, those same claws would tear through flesh instead of bark, proving that nature ultimately conquers all. In the 6 weeks leading up to October 15, 2024, the changes in Brutus's behavior shifted from subtle to unmistakable. Dylan's dedicated viewers began flooding his comment sections with concerns. "Is it just me, or does Brutus seem different lately?" became a recurring theme. The bear that once playfully nuzzled Dylan's face now maintained distance, often positioning himself across the enclosure during streams. The famous smile, the relaxed, open-mouthed expression that had charmed millions, was replaced by tight-lipped vigilance and hard stares that lasted uncomfortably long. Dylan noticed these changes but rationalized each one with increasingly desperate explanations. When Brutus stopped responding to his favorite commands, Dylan told viewers the bear was going through a phase. When Brutus began bluff charging during feeding time, rushing forward only to veer away at the last second, Dylan laughed it off as playing hard to get. His September 30th stream featured an alarming moment where Brutus stood on his hind legs and roared directly at Dylan, who responded by applauding and praising him for showing his wild side. Comments flooded in. "That's not playing, that's a threat display." But Dylan deleted the concerned messages, keeping only the supportive ones. Dr. Sandra Yellowstone returned to Dylan's compound on October 1st for what would be her final assessment. A renowned grizzly expert with 30 years of field experience, she had been hired by Dylan's insurance company to conduct quarterly evaluations. Her report, later entered into evidence, painted a chilling picture. Brutus exhibits severe stress indicators including displacement behaviors, hypervigilance, and resource guarding. His testosterone levels are elevated for the season. He views Mr. Brown not as a companion but as competition. Recommend immediate cessation of direct contact. This bear is primed for a catastrophic incident. "You don't understand him like I do," Dylan told Dr. Yellowstone during their heated discussion, live streaming the entire confrontation to his audience. You see a wild animal. I see my son. You've studied bears in labs and through binoculars. I've raised one. I've slept next to one. Shared thousands of meals with one. Don't you dare come into my home and tell me my boy is dangerous. The stream garnered 2.5 million views, with Dylan's fans rallying behind him, dismissing Dr. Yellowstone as a jealous academic trying to destroy their hero's beautiful bond. With Brutus, neighbors began reporting unusual sounds from Dylan's property. Tom and Janet Williams lived half a mile away but could hear Brutus's roars echoing through the valley at night. It wasn't like before, Janet later testified. These weren't the content rumbles we'd gotten used to. They were aggressive, angry sounds. The kind that made our dogs hide under the bed. We called Dylan about it and he said Brutus was just finding his voice. Finding his voice? He sounded like he was declaring war. Dylan's inner circle expressed escalating concerns. His editor, Jamie Park, noticed disturbing changes in the footage Dylan submitted. There were more cuts, more edits. He was removing stuff. I'd see bruises on his arms that weren't there in the next shot. Once, I caught a frame where Brutus's paw was mid-swipe at Dylan's head. When I asked about it, Dylan said it was just rough play, then fired me for undermining his vision. Ashley Mendoza, Dylan's ex-girlfriend who had left him 6 months earlier, made one final attempt at intervention. I drove out there. October 5th, begged him to listen. Brutus growled at me the entire time I was there, this deep, continuous rumble. Dylan kept saying he was just being protective. Protective? The bear looked at me like I was dinner. But perhaps the most damning warnings came from Dylan's own family. His father, Robert Brown, the veteran park ranger who had inspired Dylan's love of bears, visited on October 10th. What he saw horrified him. Brutus had changed. This wasn't the cub I'd watched Dylan raise. This was a mature male grizzly in full territorial mode. Every movement, every glance, every vocalization screamed dominance. When Dylan entered the enclosure, Brutus immediately stood tall, classic intimidation posture. Dylan interpreted it as excitement. I saw it for what it was. A challenge. The confrontation between father and son was explosive. Robert threatened to contact authorities, to have Brutus relocated. Dylan accused his father of jealousy, of being stuck in old-school thinking. Their shouting match, partially captured by security cameras, ended with Robert's prophetic words, "That bear is going to kill you, son. And when he does, it won't be because he's evil. It'll be because he's a bear and you forgot that." It was the last time Robert would see his son alive. Dylan's social media activity in his final week revealed a man doubling down. 911, what's your emergency? Oh my God. The bear. The bear is attacking him. He's streaming and the bear just, please send help. It's Dylan Brown's place on Cedar Ridge Road. Ma'am, did you say a bear is attacking someone? Yes. His pet bear. It's killing him. I can see it on the stream. Oh God, there's so much blood. We're dispatching units immediately. Is the victim still? I don't know. The stream just cut out. Please hurry. In the remote wilderness of northern Montana, where the pine forests meet the Rocky Mountain foothills, what began as a routine morning livestream would become the most horrifying wildlife attack ever broadcast to thousands of viewers in real time. The autumn air was crisp that October morning, with frost still clinging to the grass and a light mist hovering between the trees. It was the kind of peaceful mountain morning that Dylan Brown had showcased hundreds of times before to his devoted followers. Dylan Brown was 32 years old, a wildlife enthusiast turned social media sensation who had built his entire online empire around one extraordinary relationship, his bond with a 700-pound grizzly bear named Brutus. For 5 years, Dylan had documented their seemingly impossible friendship, amassing over 3 million followers across various platforms who tuned in daily to watch him hand-feed, play with, and even wrestle the massive predator. He had no idea that on this particular morning, as he adjusted his camera for what would be his final stream, that the trust he'd spent years building was about to shatter in the most violent way imaginable. This is Dylan Brown's story. A story of misplaced trust, the illusion of control, and the moment when nature's most powerful predator reminded the world why some boundaries should never be crossed. What started as a heartwarming tale of interspecies friendship would end with screens going dark, viewers calling 911, and a community forever traumatized by what they witnessed. You're watching Animal Attack Files, where we bring you the most shocking real-life animal encounters. If this story grips you, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because what you're about to witness will change how you see exotic pet ownership forever. This isn't just another wildlife tragedy, it's a cautionary tale that played out live before thousands of horrified viewers who could do nothing but watch as their favorite content creator met his fate at the paws of the animal he called his best friend. The morning of October 15, 2024, started like any other for Dylan's fans. The notification popped up at 7:30 a.m. Mountain Time. Dylan Brown is going live, morning coffee with Brutus. Within minutes, over 8,000 viewers had joined the stream, eager to start their day with the wholesome content they'd come to expect. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would haunt them forever, something that would transform from a cheerful morning routine into evidence in a death investigation. What makes this tragedy even more chilling is that every second was captured, every warning sign ignored, every moment of false security, and, ultimately, every terrifying second of the attack itself. The digital footprint Dylan left behind would become a haunting record of how wrong things can go when humans forget that no matter how many salmon treats you feed them, no matter how many belly rubs you give, a grizzly bear remains one of North America's most formidable apex predators. Dylan Brown wasn't just another wildlife enthusiast with a camera and a death wish. He was Montana's golden boy, the local kid who'd turned his childhood obsession with bears into a multi-million-dollar empire. Born in 1992 in Kalispell, Montana, Dylan grew up in the shadow of Glacier National Park, where his father worked as a park ranger and his mother taught biology at the local high school. His passion for bears began at age 7 when his father took him to observe grizzlies fishing for salmon at Brooks Falls. While other children collected baseball cards, Dylan collected every book, documentary, and research paper about bears he could find. Friends described Dylan as charismatic, fearless, and dangerously optimistic. Sarah Chin, who knew Dylan for 15 years since their freshman year at University of Montana, recalls a specific incident that captured his essence perfectly. "We were hiking in Glacier when we encountered a black bear on the trail. Everyone else backed away slowly, but Dylan? He sat down cross-legged and started talking to it like it was a dog. It said he could feel its energy, that it didn't mean us harm. The bear eventually wandered off, and Dylan acted like he'd just made a new friend. That was Dylan. He believed he had this supernatural connection with wildlife that made him immune to danger. But it was Dylan's unshakable belief in his own ability to communicate with predators that would ultimately seal his fate. He believed that fear was the enemy, that animals could sense your intentions, and that love could overcome millions of years of predatory instinct." Instagram bio read, "Building bridges between species, one trust fall at a time." His YouTube channel description boldly claimed, proving that humans and apex predators can coexist in harmony. These weren't just marketing slogans for Dylan, they were gospel truths he'd staked his life on. His family background played a crucial role in shaping this dangerous worldview. Dylan's father, Robert Brown, had spent 30 years working closely with bears in Glacier National Park without a single aggressive encounter. His mother, Dr. Patricia Brown, had published several papers on bear behavior and conservation. But while his parents respected bears from a professional distance, Dylan interpreted their careers as proof that bears could be partners rather than just subjects of study. "My parents showed me bears weren't monsters," Dylan said in a 2022 podcast interview. "I'm just taking it to the next level, showing they can be family." Dylan's rise to internet fame began in 2019 when a video of him hand-feeding a wild black bear went viral on TikTok. The clip, which showed him calmly offering berries to a 300-pound bear while narrating its body language, garnered 50 million views in a week. Suddenly, the local wildlife photographer with 10,000 Instagram followers became an overnight sensation. Sponsorship deals poured in. National Geographic featured him in a documentary. Netflix approached him about a reality series. By 2021, Dylan had quit his job as a wilderness guide to focus full-time on content creation. But success brought new pressures. The algorithm demanded increasingly spectacular content. Comments sections filled with viewers wanting bigger thrills, closer encounters, more dangerous situations. Dylan's childhood friend, Marcus Torres, who worked as his camera operator for 2 years, noticed the change. Early on, Dylan was about education. He keeps serious. Separated the main compound from Brutus's domain. Animal behavior expert Dr. Kevin Rodriguez, who later analyzed the footage frame by frame, identified this as the critical moment. At 7:36 and 42 seconds, Brutus exhibits what we call a hard stare, combined with flattened ears. His nostrils flare 3 times in rapid succession, scent checking for threats. His front paws shift into attack position. These are textbook pre-aggression indicators. An experienced handler would have aborted entry immediately. Dylan walked right past every red flag. The morning air was filled with typical mountain sounds, ravens calling from the pine trees, a distant chainsaw from a neighbor's property, the gentle rush of wind through the valley. But inside the enclosure, an ominous silence had fallen. Brutus had stopped his usual chuffing and rumbling. He wasn't making any sound at all, which Dylan mentioned to his audience. Wow, someone's in a quiet mood this morning. Usually, he's talking up a storm by now. Must be saving his energy for our big demonstration. At 7:38 a.m., Dylan opened the final gate and entered Brutus's territory. He held the salmon bucket in his left hand and his phone in his right, maintaining the live stream as he walked confidently toward the 700-pound predator. The viewership had swelled to 31,000. Comments flew past at an unreadable pace. Dylan's last coherent words to his audience were, "All right, Brutus family, prepare to have your minds absolutely blown. What you're about to see has never been attempted in the history of human-bear interaction. Today, we make history." Margaret Ellis remembers the exact moment the atmosphere shifted. Dylan was about 10 feet from Brutus when the bear's head lowered. It was subtle, but something about it made my stomach drop. I actually said out loud to my empty kitchen, "Get out of there." It was like watching a horror movie when you know something terrible is about to happen but you can't stop it. Then, at 7:39 and 15 seconds, Brutus made a sound that would haunt the thousands watching, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from the very core of his massive frame. It was not the playful rumble his audience had heard hundreds of times before. This was the warning growl of an apex predator whose territory had been invaded once too often. Dylan froze mid-step, the smile finally faltering on his face. For the first time in 5 years, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The bear and the man stood facing each other in the cold morning air, separated by 8 feet of frost-covered ground. 34,000 people watched in real time as the seconds ticked by. Someone in the chat typed, "Dylan, get out now." At exactly 7:39 and 47 seconds, Brutus charged. The attack began with a speed that defied comprehension. Brutus covered the 8 feet between himself and Dylan in less than a second, moving with the explosive power that makes grizzly bears one of nature's most formidable predators. Dylan's phone camera captured a blur of brown fur before spinning wildly as it was knocked from his hand. The device landed face up in the grass, continuing to livestream as the horrific scene unfolded just at the edge of its frame. The audio, however, captured everything with crystal clarity that would later require therapy for many who heard it. Dylan's instinctive reaction saved his life for exactly 3 seconds. As Brutus charged, Dylan threw the salmon bucket directly at the bear's face. and Dove to his right, a move he'd practiced hundreds of times during their wrestling games over the years. But this wasn't play. Brutus swatted the bucket aside with such force that it flew completely out of frame, salmon scattering across the frozen ground. The bear pivoted with terrifying agility, his massive paw catching Dylan's left shoulder as he tried to scramble away. The sound of tearing fabric mixed with Dylan's first scream, not of fear, but of genuine shock. In 5 years, Brutus had never touched him in anger. Margaret Ellis watched in paralyzed horror as Dylan tried to speak to Brutus even as the bear pursued him. "No, Brutus. Stop. It's me. Daddy." The desperation in his voice was heartbreaking, the words of a man whose entire worldview was crumbling along with his body. Brutus responded by rearing up on his hind legs, reaching his full height of nearly 10 feet, and bringing both front paws down in a hammer blow that would have killed Dylan instantly if it had connected. Dylan rolled left at the last millisecond, the impact of Brutus's paws leaving deep gouges in the earth where Dylan had been. The GoPro mounted on the eastern fence captured what happened next in merciless high definition. Dylan made it to his feet and tried to run toward the safety gate, but months of close contact conditioning had eliminated Brutus's natural wariness of humans. The bear dropped to all fours and gave chase, covering ground with bounding strides that ate up 3 feet with each movement. Wildlife photographer James Crawford, who later analyzed the footage, calculated that Brutus was moving at approximately 30 miles per hour, nearly twice as fast as Dylan's desperate sprint. Brutus caught Dylan 20 feet from the gate. His massive jaws closed on Dylan's right thigh, the bite force of 1,200 pounds per square inch, crushing through muscle and bone like tissue paper. Dylan's scream changed pitch, becoming something primal and unrecognizable. The livestream chat exploded into chaos, viewers screaming at their screens, typing frantically for someone to call 911, others frozen in disbelief. The viewer count, grotesquely, continued to climb as word spread across social media that something terrible was happening on Dylan Brown's stream. Within minutes, it would reach 47,000 concurrent viewers. Dr. Patricia Vance, a trauma surgeon who happened to be watching, later provided expert testimony on what she observed. The initial bite severed the femoral artery. You could see the arterial spray pattern on the ground, bright red blood pulsing with each heartbeat. Mr. Brown had perhaps 3 to 4 minutes before blood loss would prove fatal. But the attack had only just begun. The bear began what we call prey behavior, shaking his head violently while maintaining his grip. This is instinctive behavior designed to incapacitate large prey. Dylan's attempt to fight back was both heroic and heartbreaking. Even as Brutus shook him like a rag doll, Dylan tried to employ the submission techniques he'd used during their play sessions. He went limp, hoping to trigger the response that had always made Brutus release him during their games. But this wasn't a game. When playing ceased to work, Dylan tried to punch Brutus's nose, the classic bear defense technique his father had taught him as a child. His fists might as well have been hitting a brick wall. Brutus released his grip on Dylan's leg only to immediately bite down on his abdomen, his 4-inch canines penetrating the soft tissue with horrific ease. The attack entered its most violent phase as Brutus began to maul Dylan with systematic brutality. His massive paws, each armed with 5-inch claws, raked across Dylan's body in powerful swipes. The red flannel shirt Dylan had worn in hundreds of videos disintegrated into ribbons. The sound captured by the multiple cameras was a nightmarish symphony, the growls of an enraged predator, the wet sounds of tissue damage, and Dylan's increasingly weak attempts to call Brutus's name. Even in his final moments, some part of Dylan couldn't accept that his son was killing him. Witness Sarah Chen was watching from her apartment in Seattle when she made the 911 call that would be played in courtrooms and documentaries for years to come. I told the dispatcher that a man was being killed by a bear on a live stream. She didn't understand at first. Thought I was watching a movie. I had to scream at her that this was real, that thousands of people were watching someone die in real time. Gave her Dylan's address from memory. I'd sent him fan mail there. She kept asking if I was sure it was real. I could hear Dylan. The sounds he was making, they weren't human anymore. The tripod camera captured the moment when Brutus exhibited the behavior that would haunt viewers most deeply. After approximately 90 seconds of sustained attack, the bear suddenly stopped and sat back on his haunches, his muzzle covered in blood, watching Dylan attempt to crawl toward the gate. For a brief moment, hope flickered across the chat. He's stopping. Dylan, crawl faster. Someone help him. But bear experts recognized this behavior for what it was. Brutus was exhibiting the same pattern wild grizzlies show when attacking prey. He was letting Dylan move simply to trigger his prey drive again. 8 seconds later, as Dylan managed to drag himself another 3 feet, Brutus resumed the attack with renewed ferocity. Targeted Dylan's head and neck, the kill zones. Dylan managed to get his arms up to protect his face, a defensive posture that saved his life for another minute but resulted in catastrophic damage to his forearms. The sound of breaking bones was audible even over Dylan's weakening. One viewer later testified that she could hear her neighbors screaming through the walls as they watched the same stream. At the 4-minute mark, Dylan's movements became increasingly feeble. His attempts to call Brutus's name had degraded into wordless sounds. Blood pooled around him in an expanding circle that steamed in the cold morning air. Brutus continued his assault with mechanical persistence, no longer the playful bear who had delighted millions but revealing himself as what he had always been beneath the tricks and treats, a wild animal acting on instinct, eliminating what he perceived as a threat or rival in his territory. Then, at 7:44 a.m., 5 minutes and 13 seconds after the attack began, Dylan Brown stopped moving. His right hand, which had been weakly pushing against Brutus's chest, fell limply to the ground. The bear continued mauling him for another 30 seconds before finally stopping, standing over Dylan's motionless form with his sides heaving from exertion. Blood dripped from his muzzle onto Dylan's face in a grotesque parody of the gentle nuzzles that had charmed the internet for years. The live stream continued for another 43 seconds before someone at Instagram's Content Moderation Center finally cut the feed. Those final moments, 52,000 viewers watched as Brutus exhibited typical post-attack behavior, sniffing Dylan's body, pawing at it tentatively, then walking away to mark a nearby tree with his claws. The last image before the screen went black was of Brutus sitting by his pond, methodically cleaning the blood from his paws while Dylan's body lay crumpled and still in the background. The silence that followed was deafening. Across the world, tens of thousands of people sat in shocked disbelief, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Many would later report feeling physically ill, unable to move from their screens. Others frantically called 911. Overwhelming dispatch centers from Portland to Miami with reports of the same incident. The age of viral content had reached its darkest moment, a man's death transformed into digital spectacle, his final moments preserved forever in the cold permanence of cached data and screen recordings that would circulate despite all efforts to contain them. In Montana, the first sirens were already wailing through the mountain air, racing toward a scene that would forever change how society viewed the dangerous delusion of domesticating nature's apex predators. But for Dylan Brown, whose last words had been the name of the bear he loved more than life itself, it was already far too late. At 7:51 a.m., the first emergency vehicles screamed up the winding mountain road to Dylan Brown's compound. Deputy Marcus Rodriguez and his partner, Deputy Jennifer Walsh, were the first law enforcement on scene, having been dispatched after the flood of 911 calls overwhelmed the Flathead County emergency system. Rodriguez later testified that he'd never experienced anything like the approach to that call. Phone was blowing up with texts from people who knew I was on duty. My own teenage daughter had seen the stream and was begging me to save the bear guy. The whole world seemed to know what we were walking into before we even got there. The scene that greeted the deputies was surreal in its contradictions. The beautiful Montana morning continued unabated, birds sang, the sun climbed higher into the crystal blue sky, and the mountains stood eternal and indifferent. But inside the compound, visible through the reinforced fencing, lay a scene from a nightmare. Dylan Brown's body was clearly visible from the access road, a still form in what had once been his red flannel shirt, now dark with blood. More chilling was Brutus himself, sitting calmly by his pond, occasionally glancing at the arriving vehicles with what seemed like casual interest. Wildlife Control Officer James Patterson arrived 3 minutes behind the deputies, followed closely by the first ambulance crew. Patterson, a 25-year veteran who'd handled hundreds of bear encounters, took immediate command of the animal situation. His first priority was determining if Brutus posed an immediate threat to the responders. The bear was in what we call a post-feeding calm, Patterson explained. He'd eliminated what he perceived as a threat and was now in a passive state. But that could change in an instant if we entered his territory. Had to make the hard call. No one goes in until we have the bear contained. The paramedic team, led by senior EMT Carlos Mendez, faced an agonizing situation. Through binoculars, they could see Dylan's body, conduct a visual assessment, and knew that medical intervention was almost certainly futile. But protocol demanded they make every effort if there was even the slightest chance of life. We could see the extent of the injuries from outside the fence, Mendez later reported. The blood loss alone, but we had to try. The whole world was watching, literally. We knew from dispatch that this had been live-streamed. There were news helicopters already circling overhead. We couldn't just stand there. Patterson made the critical decision to use chemical immobilization on Brutus. Working with veterinarian Dr. Lisa Chong, who arrived at 8:07 a.m., they prepared a tranquilizer dart with a carefully calculated dose of telazol. The challenge was significant. Too little and Brutus might become agitated and attack again. Too much could be fatal to the bear. People don't understand, Dr. Chong explained, that darting a bear isn't like the movies. It takes 5 to 10 minutes for the drugs to take effect, during which the animal can become extremely dangerous. And with a bear that had just attacked, the adrenaline in his system could counteract the sedatives. At 8:14 a.m., Patterson took the shot. The dart struck Brutus in the left shoulder, causing him to spin and roar, a sound that sent chills through the assembled responders. For several tense minutes, Brutus paced aggressively, occasionally charging toward the fence where the humans waited. Then, gradually, his movements became sluggish. At 8:22 a.m., the massive grizzly swayed and collapsed onto his side, his breathing deep and regular. Only then could the emergency response truly begin. The medical team rushed through the gates with practiced efficiency, but what they found confirmed their worst fears. Carlos Mendez's report was clinical in its brutal honesty. Victim had sustained catastrophic trauma inconsistent with life. Multiple penetrating wounds to the torso, compound fractures of both forearms, severe tissue loss from the right thigh with visible femoral artery damage. No pulse, no respiratory effort. Pupils fixed and dilated. Body temperature already dropping in the cold morning air. Time of death was called at 8:24 a.m., though actual death had clearly occurred at least 30 to 40 minutes prior. While the medical team processed the scene, Deputy Rodriguez faced an unusual challenge: crowd control in the digital age. We had people showing up at the compound within minutes. Some were legitimate media, but others were what we call tragedy tourists, people who'd been watching the stream and drove out to see it in person. We had to establish a perimeter not just for physical safety but to preserve the dignity of the scene. This wasn't entertainment. A man had died. By 9 a.m., over 50 vehicles had attempted to access the private road leading to Dylan's property. The complexity of the scene required multiple specialized units. The Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department sent their investigative team. The Sheriff's Department's crime scene unit arrived to document everything. While this wasn't a criminal case, the unprecedented nature of a live-streamed fatal animal attack demanded thorough documentation. Every angle was photographed, every blood pattern mapped, every piece of scattered equipment cataloged. The salmon that Dylan had brought as treats lay scattered across the ground, a macabre reminder of how routine this morning was supposed to have been. Patterson and his team faced the delicate task of extracting Brutus from the scene while he was sedated. Using a specialized bear transport trailer, 6 men carefully loaded the unconscious grizzly, his massive form requiring a winch system to lift safely. Even sedated, even after what had happened, you could see why Dylan fell in love with this animal, Patterson reflected. Brutus was magnificent. 700 pounds of muscle and fur, his coat gleaming in the morning sun. But that beauty had always masked the reality. This was never a pet. This was a wild animal playing a role until instinct took over. The human remains recovery was conducted with as much dignity as the circumstances allowed. Dylan's body was carefully placed in a body bag and transported to the medical examiner's office in Kalispell. The scene was so extensively documented that it took 3 hours before his body could be moved. Every injury was photographed, measured, and catalogued, not out of morbid curiosity but because this case would likely influence wildlife policy for years to come. The medical examiner would later confirm what the video had shown. Dylan had suffered at least 47 distinct injuries, any one of a dozen which would have been fatal. Inside Dylan's house, investigators found his preparation notes for the morning stream. Written in his characteristic enthusiastic style, that outlined his plan for the ultimate trust exercise. He had intended to lie down and allow Brutus to stand over him, demonstrating complete submission to prove their bond transcended natural predator-prey dynamics. He was literally planning to put himself in the most vulnerable position possible, Sheriff Bradley noted. It's like he was challenging nature itself to prove him wrong. The digital aftermath was immediate and overwhelming. Before emergency responders had even cleared the scene, Dylan's death had become global news. Hashtag Dylan Brown and hashtag Brutus Attack were trending worldwide. The live stream video, despite Instagram's efforts to remove it, had been screen recorded by hundreds of viewers and was spreading across every platform. News outlets grappled with the ethical implications of covering a death that had been broadcast live. Some chose to show heavily edited clips with the actual attack blurred. Others refused to show any footage at all. Dr. Chong supervised Brutus's transport to a secure facility at the Montana Large Animal Sanctuary, where he would be held pending decisions about his fate. As the bear was driven away, still sedated in his transport cage, locals gathered along the route. Some threw flowers, others held signs reading "Justice for Dylan" and demanding Brutus be euthanized. Still others argued the bear had done nothing wrong, he had simply acted according to his nature. The convoy required police escorts to navigate through the growing crowds. By noon, the compound was empty except for law enforcement and investigators. The interaction zone where Dylan had spent thousands of hours with Brutus was now wrapped in crime scene tape. Blood stains marked the ground in a pattern that told the story of Dylan's final desperate attempts to escape. The multiple cameras he'd set up were collected as evidence, their memory cards containing footage that would be analyzed frame by frame in the coming weeks. Each device had captured the attack from a different angle, creating a comprehensive record of how a misguided dream became a nightmare. Sheriff Bradley held an impromptu press conference at 2 p.m., standing before a wall of microphones and cameras from around the world. This morning, our community lost Dylan Brown in a tragic wildlife attack, he began, his voice heavy with exhaustion. While the investigation is ongoing, I want to be clear, this was not a criminal act. This was a preventable tragedy that occurred when a wild animal acted on its natural instincts. Our thoughts are with the Brown family during this difficult time. He refused to take questions about the live stream footage or confirm details about the attack, citing the ongoing investigation. As the sun set on October 15th, casting long shadows across the empty compound, the silence was profound. Where once thousands had tuned in daily to watch Dylan and Brutus's interactions, now there was only the whisper of wind through pine trees and the distant sound of helicopters still circling overhead. The emergency response was over, but the questions were just beginning. How had this been allowed to happen? Who bore responsibility? And what would become of Brutus, the bear who had been turned into an unwitting killer by a man who loved him too much to see the danger? The news of Dylan Brown's death spread across the globe with the terrible velocity that only digital tragedy can achieve. Within hours, his name was trending in 47 countries, his final moments dissected by millions who had never heard of him before that morning. Major news. Networks interrupted regular programming with breaking news alerts. Social media star killed by pet bear during livestream. The headline was sensational enough, but the reality was far more complex and heartbreaking than any soundbite could capture. At Kalispell Regional Medical Center, Dr. Patricia Vance, the chief medical examiner, conducted the official autopsy on Dylan's body. Her findings, released 3 days later, painted a clinical picture of the attack's brutality. Dylan had suffered massive trauma to multiple organ systems. The official cause of death was listed as exsanguination due to multiple penetrating and blunt force injuries consistent with large predator attack. The report noted 47 distinct injury sites, including fatal damage to the femoral artery, liver, and spleen. Defensive wounds on his arms suggested he had remained conscious and fighting for several minutes. The toxicology report revealed no drugs or alcohol in his system. Dylan had been completely sober when he made his final, fatal decision to enter Brutus's enclosure. The Brown family's grief was complicated by the public nature of Dylan's death. Robert Brown, Dylan's father, emerged from his home 3 days after the attack to find hundreds of reporters camped on his lawn. His prepared statement was brief but powerful. "My son died doing what he loved, but he died because he forgot the fundamental truth I tried to teach him. Wild animals are not pets. They are not our friends. They are magnificent creatures that deserve respect, not domestication." Dylan's death should serve as a warning to others who might follow his path. "Please learn from our loss." His voice broke on the final words, and he retreated inside, refusing all interview requests. Patricia Brown, Dylan's mother, took a different approach. The respected biologist channeled her grief into advocacy, immediately calling for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership. "My son was brilliant, passionate, and fatally wrong," she said in an interview with National Geographic. "The system failed him by allowing him to keep a grizzly bear as a pet. No amount of love can overcome millions of years of evolution." Brutus was not a villain. He was a wild animal forced into an impossible situation. The villain here is human arrogance. The question of Brutus's fate ignited fierce debate across social media and in the real world. The Montana Large Animal Sanctuary, where he was being held, received thousands of emails daily, some demanding his immediate euthanization, others pleading for his life. Animal rights organizations mobilized, arguing that Brutus had simply acted according to his nature and shouldn't be punished for human mistakes. Change.org petition titled, "Save Brutus, He's Not a Killer, He's a Bear," gathered over 1 million signatures in 48 hours. The legal investigation revealed troubling oversights in the system that had allowed Dylan to keep Brutus. While Dylan had obtained the proper permits, inspections had been cursory at best. Former Inspector Thomas Mitchell came forward with damaging testimony. "We all knew it was dangerous, but Dylan was famous. He had millions of followers. There was pressure from above to keep him happy. When I wrote a report recommending additional safety measures, I was told to reconsider my findings. The attack was predictable and preventable." Dylan's estate faced immediate legal challenges. 3 separate lawsuits were filed within a week of his death, one from a neighbor claiming emotional distress from hearing the attack, another from parents whose children had witnessed the live stream, and a third from a former employee alleging Dylan had created an unsafe work environment. His streaming platforms demonetized all his content and began the complex process of determining what to do with his extensive video library, years of content featuring Brutus that now seemed like a chronicle of disaster in the making. The livestream footage itself became a focal point of controversy. Despite platform attempts to remove it, the video continued to circulate on darker corners of the internet. Psychologists warned about the trauma of witnessing such graphic content, especially for Dylan's younger fans, who had viewed him as a hero. Dr. Sarah Henderson, a specialist in digital trauma, reported a surge in patients seeking help after viewing the This wasn't just witnessing death, she explained. For many viewers, especially children, this was watching someone they admired and trusted be killed by something he told them was safe. It shattered their worldview. A memorial service for Dylan was held on October 22 at the Whitefish Community Church. Over 2,000 people attended, with thousands more watching via live stream, a bitter irony not lost on attendees. The service celebrated Dylan's passion for wildlife and his genuine desire to educate people about bears, while acknowledging the tragic mistakes that led to his death. His brother Michael delivered a eulogy that captured the complexity of Dylan's legacy. "My brother believed he could change the world's relationship with nature. In a way, he did this, not how he intended. His death is teaching millions what he couldn't learn in life, that wild animals must remain wild." The impact on the exotic pet community was immediate and severe. Several high-profile animal influencers announced they were rehoming their exotic pets or implementing strict no-contact protocols. Instagram and TikTok updated their community guidelines to prohibit content showing direct contact with dangerous wild animals. The Dylan Brown effect, as media dubbed it, represented a fundamental shift in how social media platforms approached wildlife content. Scientific analysis of Dylan's videos revealed years of missed warning signs. Dr. Jennifer Whitman from the University of Montana's Wildlife Biology program led a team that reviewed over 1,000 hours of Dylan's content. Their findings, published in the Journal of Wildlife Management, identified 847 instances of aggressive behavior from Brutus that Dylan had misinterpreted or ignored. Mr. Brown had created a fantasy narrative that overwrote reality, Dr. Whitman concluded. He saw what he wanted to see, and his audience, lacking expertise, trusted his interpretation. The financial aftermath was staggering. Dylan's estate, once valued at over $5 million thanks to his social media empire, faced mounting legal bills and settlements. His merchandise, t-shirts reading "Brutus's dad" and "Bear hugs are the best hugs," became grotesque reminders of his delusion. Retailers pulled products from shelves, and his published children's book, Brutus and Me, A True Story of Friendship, was recalled by the publisher. 3 weeks after the attack, the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Commission held a public hearing to determine Brutus's fate. The hearing drew hundreds of attendees and was broadcast live, bringing the story full circle to another live-streamed event. Testimony came from bear experts, ethicists, Dylan's family, and members of the public. Dr. Yellowstone, whose warnings Dylan had dismissed, provided crucial context. Brutus is not a murderer. He's a bear who acted like a bear. The tragedy is that he was placed in a situation where his natural behavior would inevitably lead to human death. After 6 hours of testimony, the commission voted 4-1 to spare Brutus's life but ordered his transfer to a accredited wildlife sanctuary in Colorado where he would have no human contact beyond basic care. The decision satisfied neither those calling for his death nor those who wanted him released to the wild. Commission Chair Barbara Lopez explained, "Brutus cannot be released, he's too habituated to humans. But he doesn't deserve death for being what he is. He will live out his days in appropriate captivity, a living reminder of why wild animals cannot be pets." Dylan's compound was eventually sold to the Montana Conservation Trust, which announced plans to convert it into an educational center focused on wildlife safety and the dangers of anthropomorphizing wild animals. The interaction zone where Dylan died would be preserved as a memorial, not to glorify his choices but to ensure others understood their consequences. Plans included a visitor center featuring testimony from experts, survivors of wildlife attacks, and critically, Dylan's own family members' warning against following his path. The 1-month anniversary of Dylan's death saw a coordinated moment of silence across social media platforms. At 7:39 a.m. Pacific Time, exact moment Brutus had charged, millions of users posted black squares with the hashtag #RespectWildlife. It was a digital memorial that Dylan might have appreciated, though probably not for the reasons intended. The boy who had dreamed of bridging the gap between humans and bears had indeed brought them together, united in the understanding that some gaps exist for good reason. In the end, Dylan Brown's legacy was not the harmonious interspecies friendship he had envisioned but a cautionary tale written in blood and broadcast to the world. His death forced a global conversation about wildlife, social media responsibility, and the dangerous delusions that can flourish when likes and views matter more than logic and safety. He had achieved his goal of changing how people saw bears, just not in the way he had hoped. The bear he called his son had taught the world a lesson that Dylan himself had refused to learn, that love, no matter how sincere, cannot tame the wild. Dr. Marcus Chen, one of North America's foremost experts on grizzly bear behavior with over 30 years of field research, was among the first scientists to conduct a comprehensive analysis of the Dylan Brown tragedy. His assessment was unflinching in its clarity. This case represents a perfect storm of anthropomorphism, social media pressure, and fundamental misunderstanding of predator behavior, Dr. Chen explained. From his office at the Yellowstone Research Institute, Mr. Brown possessed extensive knowledge about bears, but knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. He knew bear facts but ignored bear truth, that they are apex predators whose behavioral flexibility should never be mistaken for domestication. The attack pattern analysis revealed disturbing insights into how Brutus's behavior had evolved over 5 years of captivity. Dr. Chen's team identified 3 distinct phases in the bear's development. Phase 1, from cub to adolescence, showed genuine bonding behaviors. Brutus did form an attachment to Dylan. Bears are capable of recognizing and remembering individuals. Phase 2, from adolescence to sexual maturity, showed increasing tension. The play became rougher, the boundaries less clear. Phase 3, the final 6 months, showed classic displacement aggression and territorial assertion. Brutus wasn't playing anymore, he was tolerating an intrusion until he wasn't. Dr. Patricia Vance, the medical examiner who had performed Dylan's autopsy, provided crucial medical analysis of the attack dynamics. The injury pattern tells a very specific story, she stated in her expert testimony. The initial bite to the femoral artery was likely investigatory. Bears often test with their mouths. But once blood was drawn, predatory instincts engaged. The subsequent injuries show escalating violence. This wasn't a defensive attack where the bear was trying to neutralize a threat and escape. This was predation behavior. In Brutus's mind, Dylan had transformed from companion to prey. The psychological analysis of Dylan's behavior proved equally revealing. Dr. Robert Steinberg, a specialist in human-animal relationships, studied thousands of hours of Dylan's content and identified what he termed progressive reality distortion. He explained, Dylan created a narrative that became more important than reality. Each successful interaction reinforced his belief system. When warning signs appeared, he didn't see them as dangers but as challenges to overcome. His followers' adulation created an echo chamber that validated his delusions. It literally couldn't see the danger because acknowledging it would have destroyed his entire identity. Wildlife biologist Dr. Sarah Yellowstone, whose warnings Dylan had publicly dismissed, provided perhaps the most poignant expert testimony. I've studied human-bear conflicts for 25 years. Dylan's case was unique not in its outcome but in its documentation. We have thousands of hours showing the progression from inappropriate bonding to fatal attack. Every mistake is preserved. Every ignored warning is time-stamped. This tragedy is a masterclass in what not to do with wild animals, and that may be Dylan's most valuable legacy. His death might save others. The veterinary analysis of Brutus's behavior, conducted by Dr. Lisa Chong, who had helped sedate him after the attack, revealed additional layers of complexity. Brutus showed signs of chronic stress that Dylan misinterpreted as contentment, she reported. The repetitive behaviors Dylan called dancing were actually stereotypies, abnormal behaviors that captive animals develop under stress. Smiling was stress panting. The talking was anxiety vocalization. Dylan saw what he wanted to see, not what was actually there. This bear was screaming for help in every way he could, and nobody heard him. Comparative analysis with other fatal bear attacks revealed striking patterns. Dr. James Morrison from the International Bear Association studied 50 years of fatal encounters. Dylan's attack fits a specific profile, what we call conditioned aggression. Unlike defensive attacks, where bears are surprised or protecting cubs, this was a bear that had lost all fear of humans through prolonged contact. These attacks tend to be longer, more severe, and more predatory in nature. The bear isn't trying to escape, it's asserting dominance or feeding. The legal implications extended far beyond Montana. Constitutional lawyer Jennifer Hayes examined the regulatory framework that had allowed Dylan to keep Brutus. This case exposes massive gaps in exotic animal legislation, she argued. We have a patchwork of state laws, federal guidelines, and local ordinances that create loopholes big enough to drive a bear through. Dylan exploited these gaps, but he wasn't alone. Thousands of Americans keep dangerous exotic animals with minimal oversight. This tragedy should catalyze comprehensive federal legislation. Behavioral economist Dr. David Park analyzed the social media economy that had incentivized Dylan's increasingly dangerous behavior. Dylan was earning approximately $500,000 annually from his content. Every boundary he pushed, every risk he took, translated directly into views and revenue. The platform's algorithms rewarded spectacular content without regard for safety. In economic terms, Dylan was responding rationally to market incentives. The market just happened to be incentivizing his death. The primate behavior expert Dr. Jane Woodland offered a unique perspective by comparing Dylan's situation to her work with chimpanzees. People think because primates are more closely related to humans, they make better companions than bears. But I've seen the same tragedy play out with chimps, raised from babies, treated like children, until sexual maturity triggers violent attacks. The lesson isn't about bears or chimps or tigers. It's about the fundamental impossibility of domesticating wild animals within a single generation. Evolution doesn't care about your emotional connection. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Michael Roberts examined the psychological impact on witnesses. The trauma of watching Dylan's death live has created what we're calling digital PTSD. Unlike traditional trauma where victims can avoid reminders, these witnesses are confronted with their trauma every time they open social media. The algorithm shows them similar content, news updates, memorial posts. They can't escape the cycle. We're seeing anxiety, depression, and intrusive thoughts in thousands of viewers, particularly young people who idolize Dylan. The statistical analysis was sobering. Dr. Chen's team compiled data showing that fatal attacks by captive bears were 60 times more likely than attacks by wild bears when adjusted for population exposure. Wild bears actively avoid humans. Captive bears lose that avoidance. When you remove fear, you don't create friendship, you create danger. Dylan's daily interactions with Brutus weren't building trust, they were destroying the barriers that keep both species safe. Ethologist Dr. Patricia Green studied the anthropomorphism evident in Dylan's content. He consistently attributed human emotions and motivations to Brutus. Felt jealous or happy. This projection prevented him from accurately reading actual bear behavior. When Brutus displayed clear aggression signals, Dylan interpreted them through a human emotional framework. The direct stare wasn't a threat, it was intensity of feeling. Ears back wasn't aggression, it was concentration. This fundamental misreading cost him his life. The consensus among experts was unprecedented in its unanimity. Cross disciplines, biology, psychology, medicine, law, ethics, the message was consistent. Dylan Brown's death was predictable, preventable, and pedagogical. Dr. Morrison summarized the collective findings. This wasn't a freak accident or unexpected tragedy. This was the logical endpoint of a series of well-documented mistakes. Every expert who examined this case reached the same conclusion. This was not a matter of if, but when. The final expert report, compiled by an interdisciplinary team for the Montana Wildlife Commission, ran 300 pages. Its executive summary was blunt. Mr. Brown's death represents a systematic failure of regulation, of platform responsibility, of public education, and ultimately of personal judgment. His genuine love for wildlife was corrupted by fame and fantasy into something that destroyed both him and perverted the nature of the animal he claimed to love. This tragedy must serve as a watershed moment in how we approach human-wildlife interaction in the digital age. As Dr. Chin concluded in his final statement, Dylan Brown wanted to show the world that bears could be our friends. Instead, he proved definitively that they cannot. His thousands of hours of footage will be studied for decades, not as a guide to human bear friendship, but as a comprehensive record of how such attempts inevitably end. In death, Dylan has become the teacher he always wanted to be, just teaching the opposite lesson from what he intended. Dylan Brown's tragedy teaches us the most fundamental lesson about wildlife. Love is not enough. Dylan possessed genuine, deep love for Brutus and bears in general. He dedicated his life to what he believed was conservation and education. But his love was corrupted by a dangerous delusion that human emotion could overcome millions of years of evolution. His story serves as the ultimate cautionary tale for an age where social media can transform dangerous fantasies into viral reality. Dylan had everything: knowledge, experience, resources, and most importantly, countless warnings. Yet he chose to believe his own narrative over nature's truth, and that choice killed him. The prevention lessons from Dylan's death are crystal clear, written in blood and broadcast to millions. First and foremost, wild animals are not pets, regardless of how young you obtain them or how tenderly you raise them. A grizzly bear hand-raised from 3 months old is still a grizzly bear, possessing the same instincts, drives, and capabilities as its wild cousins. The experts who analyzed Dylan's case identified specific warning signs that preceded the fatal attack. Brutus exhibited increasing territorial behavior, resource guarding around food decreased, responsiveness to commands, stereotypical stress behaviors, aggressive vocalizations, and most tellingly, what behaviorists call hard stares. Prolonged, unblinking eye contact that in bear language is a direct threat. These warning signs extended beyond just Brutus's behavior. Dylan himself exhibited symptoms of what psychologists now recognize as exotic pet delusion syndrome. He anthropomorphized constantly, attributing human emotions to animal behaviors. He dismissed expert warnings as jealousy or ignorance. He escalated dangerous behaviors in response to social media metrics. He isolated himself from voices of reason, surrounding himself with enablers and fans. Most dangerously, he believed his experience made him exceptional, immune to the rules that govern everyone else. When multiple experts, family members, and even his own father, a career park ranger, warned him, Dylan's response was to broadcast their concerns to his audience for mockery. Dylan's positive qualities make his story even more tragic. He was genuinely passionate about wildlife conservation, donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to habitat preservation. He educated millions about bear behavior, diet, and habitat needs. His enthusiasm inspired countless young people to pursue careers in wildlife biology. He was articulate, charismatic, and by all accounts, a kind and generous person. But these positive traits became weaknesses when filtered through his fundamental delusion. His passion became obsession, his education became indoctrination, His charisma became a tool for spreading dangerous ideas. The very qualities that could have made him a powerful force for conservation instead made him a cautionary tale. The practical safety measures that could have prevented this tragedy are straightforward but require humility to implement. Professional facilities that house bears maintain strict protocols, double fencing systems with lockout areas, no direct contact ever, feeding through secure channels, and multiple staff present for any necessary interaction. Regular behavioral assessments by qualified experts and immediate response to any aggressive behavior. Emergency protocols including chemical immobilization tools and escape routes, clear chains of command. With override authority. Most importantly, they maintain professional distance. Bears are residents, not friends, subjects of care, not objects of affection. Dylan violated every one of these protocols, creating what experts called a Swiss cheese model of failure, multiple system breakdowns, aligning to create catastrophe. He worked alone, entering Brutus's space with no backup. He ignored aggressive displays, interpreting them as play or communication. He hand-fed and made physical contact, erasing the boundaries that keep both species safe. He dismissed expert assessments that contradicted his beliefs. Most fatally, he loved Brutus too much to see him clearly as a powerful predator temporarily, tolerating a weaker species in his territory. The victim legacy extends far beyond Dylan's death. His family has established the Dylan Brown Wildlife Education Foundation, dedicated to teaching accurate information about human-wildlife boundaries. His mother, Dr. Patricia Brown, travels to schools and universities, sharing her son's story as a warning. Dylan died because he forgot that loving nature means respecting it, not conquering it, she tells audiences. The father leads wilderness safety courses, ensuring his son's death educates others. His brother Michael produces documentaries about wildlife rehabilitation that emphasize proper protocols and professional distance. The policy changes triggered by Dylan's death represent the most comprehensive reform of exotic animal legislation in decades. Montana passed Dylan's law, requiring federal-level certification for anyone housing large predators, mandatory behavioral assessments every 90 days, immediate reporting of any aggressive incidents, and criminal penalties for social media content showing unsafe interactions. Federal legislation is pending that would establish nationwide standards for exotic animal ownership, social media platform liability for dangerous content, and mandatory warning labels on wildlife interaction videos. The insurance industry has responded by making coverage for exotic animal ownership either prohibitively expensive or completely unavailable, creating a de facto ban through market forces. The community impact of Dylan's death continues to ripple outward. Whitefish, Montana, once proud of their famous bear whisperer, now hosts an annual wildlife safety symposium. Local schools have implemented comprehensive education programs about wildlife boundaries. The tourism industry, which once promoted Dylan's compound as an attraction, now emphasizes responsible wildlife viewing from safe distances. Tour operators report that visitors are more cautious, more respectful, and more interested in learning about natural bear behavior, rather than seeking close encounters. The digital landscape has transformed as well. Platform algorithms now deprioritize content showing dangerous human-wildlife interactions. Warning labels appear on videos featuring exotic animals. Comment sections on wildlife videos are moderated for safety information. The Dylan Brown Protocol, automatic intervention when live streams detect potential danger, has prevented several copycat incidents. Significantly, the culture around wildlife content has shifted from celebrating dangerous proximity to respecting professional distance. For those who work with wildlife professionally, Dylan's death has become a teaching tool. Rehabilitation centers use his videos in training, showing new staff exactly what not to do. Zookeepers discuss his case in safety meetings, reinforcing why protocols exist. Photographers share his story to explain why they use long lenses and maintain distance. Park rangers reference him when explaining bear safety to visitors. In death, Dylan has become the educator he always wanted to be, though teaching through counterexample rather than inspiration. The psychological impact on Dylan's audience has been profound and lasting. Many of his young fans have reported a fundamental shift in how they view nature, from something to be conquered or befriended to something to be respected from afar. Support groups have formed for those who witnessed the attack, processing both trauma and the collapse of their worldview. Therapists report that many patients struggle with guilt, feeling they should have seen the warning signs, should have spoken up, should have stopped watching and enabling his dangerous behavior. The expert consensus on preventing future tragedies is unanimous. We must stop romanticizing dangerous animals. Every viral video of someone cuddling a tiger, every Instagram post of hand-feeding bears, every TikTok of exotic pets acting cute contributes to a culture that kills. We must platform actual experts over charismatic amateurs, prioritize safety over spectacle, and teach children that the greatest respect we can show wildlife is leaving it wild. As Dr. Chen stated in his final report, the most loving thing you can do for a wild animal is maintain appropriate distance. The most educational content shows animals being animals, not props for human ego. The final lesson from Dylan Brown's death is both simple and profound. Nature does not care about your feelings. It does not respond to your love, your dedication, or your social media following. A grizzly bear remains a grizzly bear whether you call it your son or recognize it as a dangerous predator. The millions of years of evolution that created Brutus's hunting instincts, territorial aggression, and predatory capabilities cannot be overwritten by 5 years of treats and training. This is not cruelty or betrayal. It is simply nature being nature. As you finish watching this video, remember Dylan Brown not as a fool or a victim, but as a man whose genuine love for wildlife was corrupted by modern fame into something deadly. Share his story not for shock value but for education. When you see content celebrating dangerous human-wildlife interactions, remember the morning of October 15, 2024, when 47,000 people watched a man die because he forgot that some boundaries exist for good reason. Dylan wanted to change how the world sees bears. In his death, he succeeded, just not as he intended. His final lesson, written in blood and broadcast to millions, is clear: respect nature's boundaries, for they are drawn by death itself. If this story has impacted you, please share it with others who need to hear its message. Subscribe to our channel for more critical wildlife education content that celebrates animals from a safe distance and teaches respect over recklessness. Together, we can ensure that Dylan Brown's death was not in vain, that his tragedy becomes education, and that his love for bears lives on in teaching others to love them properly, from a distance, with respect, and with the humility to accept that some gaps between species should never be bridged. Remember, the bear you think loves you is still a bear. The wolf you hand-raised is still a wolf. The tiger that purrs when you pet it is still a tiger. And as Dylan Brown learned in his final moments, when instinct meets opportunity, love offers no protection. Nature always wins. Boys.